ASEAN has demonstrated to the world the immense benefits a regional organization can bring, from promoting peace and stability to enhancing economic and political cooperation. This reflects an inevitable trend of our times, where nations are increasingly uniting to tackle global challenges. Yet, in Northeast Asia, a region home to some of the world's most advanced economies, with shared cultural, linguistic, and historical ties, the idea of forming a regional organization seems almost impossible to realize. Why is that? Is it because of unresolved historical conflicts, or are external forces deliberately keeping the region divided? In this video, let's explore this issue together. Since the 1960s, during the Cold War, many developing countries began to realize that the bipolar world order was inherently unfair. This system seemed to serve only the interests of the US and the Soviet Union in their fierce rivalry, leaving smaller nations in a passive position amid global upheavals. To reduce this pressure and safeguard their national interests, they sought to establish regional organizations where the voices of member states could be amplified. Even today, regional organizations play a crucial role, especially as the world enters a new era of geopolitical competition between the US and China. These organizations not only help build trust among members, but also serve as a form of preventive diplomacy. Dialogue forums within such frameworks allow countries to exchange views, discuss pressing issues, and minimize risks of miscalculations due to misunderstanding each other's intentions. Moreover, regional organizations often establish common codes of conduct for their members. While the legal binding force of these rules may vary, they create pressure for countries to carefully consider their actions, as violations could damage their standing and reputation. Some organizations, like ASEAN, even introduce treaties that external countries must sign to engage in cooperation. In other words, regional organizations can actively shape the rules of the game in their area to best protect the interests of their member nations. Bruce Russett, a renowned scholar of democratic peace theory, emphasized in his book, Triangulating Peace, Democracy, Interdependence, and International Organizations, that nations connected through international organizations are less likely to engage in conflict due to shared interests and established channels of dialogue. Similarly, German philosopher Immanuel Kant, in his 18th century essay, Perpetual Peace, a Philosophical Sketch, proposed that countries should form common institutions to limit war and enhance cooperation. This idea laid the foundation for many later regional organizations, including ASEAN and the EU. However, regional organizations are not without their downsides. One of the biggest challenges is the risk of being dominated by major powers. For instance, ASEAN, despite leveraging multilateralism to mitigate pressures from US-China rivalry, still faces the challenge of navigating demands to align with one side or the other. Secondly, internal disagreements can sometimes emerge within these organizations. In the European Union, EU, Poland and Hungary have frequently clashed with other member states over issues of rule of law and press freedom. Within NATO, the long-standing dispute between Greece and Turkey over Aegean Sea sovereignty serves as another example. Similarly, in the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt severed diplomatic ties with Qatar in 2017, accusing it of supporting terrorism and maintaining overly close relations with Iran. The idea of forming a regional organization for Northeast Asian countries would also need to account for such benefits and challenges. First, we need to define which countries make up Northeast Asia. This region stretches from north to south along the eastern edge of the Asian continent and includes China, Japan, South Korea, and North Korea. Northeast Asia boasts a dynamic and developed economy, where economic interconnectivity is increasingly evident. Remarkably, these countries have achieved significant cooperative outcomes even without a formal free trade agreement. A prime example is Japan's nearly $130 million investment in the Pohang industrial complex in South Korea. Pohang eventually became the world's second-largest steel production hub, contributing significantly to South Korea's stable economic growth. Such economic collaboration has naturally created connections among countries in the region. They have recognized that a regional organization could help them address global challenges more effectively and strengthen their influence in international affairs. To begin with, Northeast Asian countries joined larger-scale regional organizations such as the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, PECC, in 1980, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, in 1989. However, as we can observe, participation in these organizations does not reflect the unique collaborative goals of Northeast Asian nations. A significant step forward occurred in 1999 when China, Japan, and South Korea initiated trilateral cooperation. Yet the level of institutionalization remained weak, and this mechanism did not generate the profound impact that many had hoped for. Although a trilateral cooperation secretariat was eventually established, its role has primarily been limited to offering policy advice rather than making critical decisions. Over time, trilateral cooperation has waned, and Northeast Asian countries continue to seek new and more effective mechanisms to foster regional collaboration. While economic issues remain a central focus, a viable framework to address territorial disputes and historical grievances between the nations is indispensable. Despite decades of effort, no formal regional organization for Northeast Asian countries has been established. What are the reasons behind this? Why can countries with advanced economies and cultural ties not form a regional organization akin to ASEAN or the EU? Since the end of World War II, Northeast Asia has been swept into a bipolar world order where the intense confrontation between two opposing ideologies, communism and capitalism, left a deep imprint. This was an era when the Korean Peninsula was divided between two of the most powerful forces of the time, the United States and the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Japan, after signing the San Francisco Treaty in 1951, officially entered the U.S. sphere of influence, while China chose the socialist path under the guidance of the Soviet Union. Looking at this overall picture, one can easily see a clear ideological divide. China and North Korea belong to the socialist bloc, opposing Japan and South Korea, two nations aligned with capitalism. In this context, it was nearly impossible for these four countries to come together to form a regional organization. With such strong ideological polarization, the two sides couldn't sit at the same table, rendering any attempt to establish a regional mechanism in Northeast Asia during the Cold War meaningless. When the Cold War ended, it seemed like Northeast Asian countries might have a chance to move closer to each other. However, reality proved to be far more complex. The bipolar world order had faded, but it gave way to a new era of geostrategic rivalry between the United States and China. Even though the zero-sum mindset of the Cold War had receded, the ongoing competition between these two superpowers continued to act as a significant barrier. Consider the EU and NATO. Both are long-standing organizations heavily influenced by one or a few dominant powers. Now imagine if Northeast Asia were to establish a regional organization. Who would lead it? China, with its overwhelming economic, military, and diplomatic strength, would undoubtedly seize the opportunity to set rules in its favor. However, this runs counter to the strategic interests of the United States. Washington would not sit idly by as its two key allies in Asia, Japan and South Korea, become entangled in an organization under the control of its primary rival. As a result, the US laid its groundwork early on. Immediately after World War II, Washington established strong alliances with Japan and South Korea. These relationships have not only been maintained, but have also been reinforced over the decades. A striking example is the US-Japan-South Korea Trilateral Summit, held at Camp David in August 2023. At this meeting, the three nations pledged to deepen cooperation, transforming their trilateral relationship into a de facto alliance that serves as an effective counterweight to China's growing influence. The challenges to regional integration in Northeast Asia are not just shaped by the global context and external actors, but also deeply rooted in the internal dynamics of the region itself. These internal issues have rendered the dream of a regional organization seemingly unattainable. First, the history of Northeast Asia is marked by a long series of wars and conflicts. The lingering wounds from the past make building trust and fostering cooperation among countries incredibly difficult. To this day, South Korea frequently issues statements demanding compensation from Japan for the damages inflicted during World War II. In 2018, a South Korean court ruled that certain Japanese companies must pay reparations to South Korean plaintiffs in cases related to wartime forced labor. However, Tokyo responded by asserting that all historical grievances had been settled under the 1965 Treaty on Basic Relations between the two nations. The situation deteriorated further in 2019 when Tokyo imposed export restrictions on critical high-tech materials to Seoul. Neither side was willing to back down. Meanwhile, China remained on the sidelines, benefiting from the rift between two key allies of its rival. Second, territorial disputes continue to be a persistent issue in the region. Northeast Asia is one of the few areas in the world where Cold War-era divisions and conflicts remain largely unresolved. These include the division of the Korean Peninsula and the ongoing dispute between North and South Korea over the northern limit line in the Yellow Sea, the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, and Okino-Torishima disputes between Japan and China, and the Takeshima-Dokdo dispute between Japan and South Korea. Additionally, there are numerous potential conflicts over exclusive economic zones involving Japan, South Korea, and China. These divisions and disputes create significant political instability that is difficult to overcome in Northeast Asia. The combination of these two factors has led to an inevitable outcome: a severe erosion of trust among the nations of the region, both at the political level and among the general public. The idea of a Northeast Asian regional organization, where countries can discuss issues equitably and freely, seems almost unimaginable. Most parties fear losing leverage or being bound by regulations that do not favor their interests. This is especially true for Japan and South Korea, which remain wary of being subjected to standards potentially shaped by their regional competitors. The absence of trust, compounded by historical conflicts and ongoing disputes, has made Northeast Asia a region where consensus is difficult to achieve, let alone the creation of a shared regional organization. Another factor that continues to complicate the situation is the strong nationalism in Northeast Asia. This is a serious consequence of historical wounds and unresolved disputes, making the already difficult task of establishing a regional organization even more distant. For example, China frequently organizes historical commemoration events, such as the 1931 Mukden incident, when Japan invaded Manchuria, while also stirring anti-Japan sentiment regarding the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. In 2012, after Japan nationalized the islands, anti-Japan protests erupted strongly in China, leading to acts of vandalism against Japanese vehicles and businesses. In South Korea, tensions with Japan have not eased. In 2019, South Korea did not renew the General Security of Military Information Agreement, GSOMIA, with Japan, citing historical and trade disputes. This decision received widespread public support in South Korea, but further strained bilateral relations. Just recently, in the 2024 South Korean parliamentary elections, the Democratic Party of Korea capitalized on anti-Japan sentiment among the public to criticize the ruling People Power Party, the current president's party, for handling Japan's release of treated radioactive water from its nuclear plant into the ocean, among other issues. This strategy helped the Democratic Party secure a victory, but also deepened the rift between the two nations. North Korea in Northeast Asia can be likened to a small hedgehog constantly spiking its fur to protect itself from unfriendly neighbors. However, it is precisely this fierce self-defense that makes it difficult for the country to integrate into the region. These spikes are nothing but the military power and nuclear weapons program of Pyongyang. According to estimates from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, North Korea allocates up to 1/3 of its gross national income to the military, with approximately 6% of the defense budget focused on nuclear weapons. This is the survival shield of the Kim Jong-un regime. Strategically, China views North Korea as a necessary buffer zone to protect its own security. However, Beijing is not necessarily a safe shield for Pyongyang. The lesson from the Korean War shows that China only intervenes when the situation directly threatens its interests. Meanwhile, Japan and South Korea, with US support, continuously conduct large-scale military exercises, keeping tensions on the Korean peninsula at a constant alert level. Therefore, North Korea sees nuclear weapons as its trump card in ensuring national security, but this also becomes a major point of contention for the region. Non-proliferation of nuclear weapons will always be a central issue on the agenda of any Northeast Asian regional organization, but this is something North Korea cannot abandon. As a result, Pyongyang steadfastly refuses to participate in regional organizations of this kind. An organization focused on denuclearizing the Korean peninsula without Kim Jong-un's participation would be meaningless. Moreover, international sanctions imposed on North Korea's nuclear program have isolated its economy. In 2023, 98% of North Korea's foreign trade turnover came from bilateral relations with China, creating an almost absolute economic dependence. With this situation, Pyongyang is not particularly concerned with the idea of a regional organization aimed at promoting economic cooperation or political stability. To prevent the Northeast Asian region from crossing the red line of conflict, countries in the region have temporarily sought more flexible alternative solutions. Instead of striving to build a comprehensive regional organization, China, South Korea, and Japan tend to rely on existing multilateral mechanisms to resolve their differences. Meanwhile, the Northeast Asian region has only held sporadic summits between parties. These summits are easily disrupted by tensions over sovereignty and territorial issues. When they do occur, they are primarily symbolic rather than substantive, and rarely achieve significant breakthroughs. A typical example is the Northeast Asia Summit in May 2024, held after a long delay. Although there were efforts to promote cooperation, the final results focused only on relatively non-sensitive issues, such as trade and cultural exchanges between the peoples of the countries. While these agreements were positive, they were still insufficient to overcome the deep political and historical divides in the region. In reality, simple regionalism is unlikely to develop in Northeast Asia, while political conflicts and disputes remain unresolved. In this context, external regional organizations, such as ASEAN, have been viewed as an intermediary solution to support Northeast Asian cooperation. ASEAN, with its experience in reconciling the interests of diverse nations, has created a flexible cooperation model that Northeast Asia could draw from. However, this has also led to a specific situation. Despite being the global economic center, the Northeast Asian region relies on external mechanisms to maintain stability. The most obvious consequence for Northeast Asia is that the region is always in a state of simmering tension. While no major conflict has occurred in the past 70 years, issues such as the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula or territorial sovereignty disputes periodically spark waves of instability. In the context of the US strengthening its alliance with South Korea and Japan, the idea of establishing a Northeast Asian regional organization seems increasingly distant. However, blindly following the US strategy is not an easy choice for Tokyo and Seoul, as they are faced with a giant like China right on their borders. Factors such as the US-China competition, historical disagreements, and persistent territorial disputes have become the greatest barriers to reconciliation and regional integration. The lack of trust between countries only makes the idea of a regional organization in Northeast Asia seem far-fetched, especially when the US continues to maintain a strong presence in the area. Thank you for joining us on this journey to explore the Northeast Asia region. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and we look forward to seeing you in our next videos.